Sam, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with the Florida Baptist Witness today and being part of this Behind the Pulpit interview series. So glad to be in Bradenton today. We're going to just dive right in. You serve as senior pastor of West Bradenton Baptist Church here, and you're also president of Rainer Research and co-founder and co-owner of Rainer Publishing. How does anyone keep all of those plates spinning?
Well, it is difficult, but I would say that it's an issue of discipline and a schedule. So I keep a very tight schedule, and I'm disciplined to stay on that schedule. Some might say that it's OCD. Others, like my wife. Others.
Whatever works for you.
Yes, yeah. But I enjoy what I do. So my hobbies, I run, but that's about it. So I don't golf. I don't do a lot of things that take a lot of time. So a lot of my free time is spent, doing editing for the publishing company and trying to sell some books and doing some consulting with Rainer Research and other churches. So a lot of the hobby time and really time that I might be preaching and speaking somewhere else is spent doing those activities. I also have 3 small children, 6, 4, and 18 months. So it is a lot of plates, but I love what I do. And I guess when you have a passion for what you do, it's a little easier to stick to it. But I just have the discipline to stick to a schedule and try to keep to that.
Help us understand a little bit about what your research and publishing companies do.
Yeah, so the publishing company, Rainer Publishing, publishes practical church leadership books. So very small kind of market there, but that's what we want to do. We want to put books out that would otherwise not be published that pertain to some niche kind of issues. So one of our best-selling books is on starting a small group, which, there are a few books out there, but those types of books, they're not going to sell 1 million copies. It'd be great if one of ours did, of course, but so we're not looking for big market books. We're looking for books that are more small or mid-market books that there's a good message there that would otherwise not be published. And also help some authors out that perhaps aren't published that should be published. Mm-hmm. So we're always looking for works that may not otherwise get out or authors that would otherwise not be published. The research is kind of I do things on a case-by-case basis. So it's project-based. I'll take on 3 or 4 projects a year. So it's not like I've got an office downtown with 20 staff or anything like that.
You wish.
That would be probably too many plates spinning. But I have a network of people across the nation that I utilize in order to accomplish whatever project needs to be done. So I've done work for church, and magazines, Christian magazines. I've done work for church builders. Certainly do consultations for churches, coaching for pastors, any number of things that's in that research category. But I'm really only taking on 4 or 5 projects a year. So it may sound a little more impressive than it really is. But like I said, I love what I do.
In one of your blog posts, and so in all those plates that we're talking about spinning, your blog is another one. In one of those blog posts, you ask, should pastors work to build a personal platform? What do you mean by that, and how would you answer your own question?
Yes, that's a great question. So when people talk about platform, I think that it can be viewed wrongly. And I think people can use it wrongly. There are those who unfortunately just want to build a personal name recognition, build themselves up, and use the church to launch themselves. So if you're using platform in that way, I would say that's a poor use of a platform. But if you're talking about platform in the sense of reputation, a platform in the sense of people knowing who you are, I do think it's important for pastors to be known in their communities. So I would challenge any pastor to be more concerned about your reputation or your platform in your local community than, say, how many Twitter followers you have. It's great if you have a lot of Twitter followers. It's not that's wonderful, so you can get a message out to a lot of people. But I would be more concerned about what you're doing locally in your community and the reputation that you have in your community and the quote-unquote platform in your local community than I would say what's your national platform and what's your national name recognition. So when I'm talking platform, I'm talking more in the sense of, hey, what do the community leaders think of you? Are you even connected to the community leaders? And do you even know what's going on in their lives and what they're doing in their spheres of influence?
Yeah, you got me thinking, do you mean the platform that you would have as a pastor when your church does ministry in Bradenton, or do you mean the platform that you have when you attend city council meetings or school board meetings or serve on the school board or whatever?
I think it's all of the above. I have a blog. Not everyone needs to blog. Not everyone wants to blog. But I have a blog. I try to use that blog to the glory of God. And it does have a national message. I do write generally. But the bulk of my time is spent in my community, trying to influence what's happening here with the gospel. So I'm called to Bradenton, Florida. This is where my primary calling is. I'm concerned about what's going on in California and Alaska and New York. I mean, of course, I care about those areas. I care about what's going on in the entire world, but my primary calling is here locally. So when we're talking platform, whether it be the church and what you're saying in the pulpit or what you're writing on your blog, I would hope that pastors would be more focused on that 2-mile radius around their church than say, other areas of the nation.
And how beyond, because churches would all say, we are doing outreach. And so beyond outreach ministries, how would you recommend, or what have you seen that works for pastors to build their platform in their communities?
Join a civic organization. Whatever it is in your community, all of them have different ones. You'll find things like Kiwanis and Rotary. The Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber of Commerce here is an award-winning chamber. So pick something where you know where the influencers are, and join that organization and do everything you can to serve whatever civic organization you're a part of. And while you're there, you're going to make friends. You're going to get to know people, hopefully, and learn a little bit about how you can minister to them. So one of the best things a lead pastor can do is join a civic organization, and just about any pastor on staff could as well, and represent your church in that way. And you're really going to get to know your community. So that would be the first way I could do that. Another way you could do that is just join a ball team, and whether it's soccer or basketball league or what have you, do something that gets you out into the community and gets you out of the church bubble, because us pastors can really get in that church bubble, and you have to work hard.
Feel so comfortable in the bubble.
At some churches, it's comfortable in this bubble here at my church because It's so loving, but not all churches are necessarily that loving. But yeah, sometimes the church bubble can be a difficult place to be. But generally speaking, you're right. Yeah, it is a comfortable place. You can sit in your office. You can talk to the people you know and the people that love you. But you have to push hard, and you have to lead by example. So if a church doesn't have an evangelistic pastor, it's unlikely that church is an evangelistic church. So you do, as a pastor, whether you're lead or someone else who serves under a lead pastor, you do have to lead by example. And so I'd encourage, just get out of that church bubble, civic organization, ball team, whatever it is. And I don't know if that's a platform issue or not, but it certainly helps build your reputation in the community to where you're not just, where you have no name recognition at all. You should be out there in your community in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah. You also ask in your blog, should your church have a brand? What is your best answer to this question?
Yeah, and I'm using brand loosely as a term. People perceive things about your church. They perceive things about your church one way or the other. So if you're never mowing your yard, if your facility is in disrepair, if you have hateful things on your church sign, you are building a brand in that way. So I'm using brand broadly in that sense. I'm not talking in a specific sense, but as a pastor, as you're out in the community, you should ask people, hey, what do you think about my church? Do you know anything about my church? I fear that a lot of churches are unknown in their community. I've talked to people here And there's many people that know our church. There's many that don't. And often the ones that don't really know our church, I'll tell them, oh, we're off 43rd. We're south of the elementary school. Oh, you're the church with the white columns. And that's all they know. And I'm thinking, hey, we need to do a better job of getting our message out, because this is a great place. This is a great church. West Bradenton's a wonderful place to be part of God's family. So you always are casting some perception of yourself, and people are always perceiving something of you. I would rather control that narrative than just let it just float out there. So when I talk branding, I'm talking about, hey, when you walk in the grocery store and you ask people about your church, what do they say? Hopefully, even if they disagree with you, they know who you are and they know what you're about.
Would you say, as Southern Baptists, that there is a common theme that people have when you say, I pastor a Southern Baptist church, not this church, but, the typical reaction, if they're not Southern Baptist, automatically takes them to do what?
I think it depends. So if you're in a small town in the Deep South, say a small town in Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, I think you might get certain answers because Southern Baptists are prevalent there. And many of those answers will be dependent upon someone's experience with the Southern Baptist Church. So they can vary from very bad to very good. And I think a lot of people in the older generations might have certain views of Southern Baptists because they grew up in an era and a time when denominations were more homogenous. So a Methodist church in a certain town looked very similar to a Methodist church in another town, and same with Southern Baptist. Even a lot of the architecture in the 40s, 50s, and 60s looks the same. Our church was built in the 1960s, and I can point to 10 other churches that have a very similar floor plan as ours. So I think with the older generation, they might have some views, but certainly the younger generation where we are in Bradenton, when you say Southern Baptist, they don't know the difference between Southern Baptist and Episcopal, Catholic, Methodist. And I'm finding that even some of the pastors now don't really know the differences between denominations anymore. So I do think that there are certain regions of the U.S. where you're going to have certain answers, and maybe with an older generation you may have certain answers, but a lot of the denominational lines are breaking down now, and you're just not seeing the differentiation that you used to see in churches. I tell people, you need to know what's going on at any specific local church that you want to be a part of. Just because it's Methodist, just because it's Baptist, just because it's Presbyterian, really doesn't mean a whole lot now. You need to be asking the questions of what that local church believes and where they are going as a specific congregation.
Let's shift gears for a second. In an era when everyone in Baptist circles is talking about church planting, you have a podcast called The Established Church, and that intrigued me. We all know what the numbers say when it comes to Southern Baptist membership and baptisms. What does this mean for the future of the Established Church, and why did you pick that as your focus?
Well, God picked it. I didn't pick it. I'm called to the Established Church. I often joke with people that I consult or when I'm speaking that, many Mondays I feel called to plant a church, and that many Mondays church planters feel called to be an established church. The grass is always greener, I guess, but I love the Established Church. I like the pews and the old buildings and all generations and the good things that come with the Established Church, the baggage that comes with the Established Church. I wish I could explain it a little better. I just love these churches that have been around a long time. I think there's a lot of heart and soul in churches that have been around a while that have 5 generations in them. It's harder. Right. I think it's harder. You don't get to create a culture. You inherit a culture in an established church. But I do have a deep love for the Established Church. So part of the reason we started we call it the est.church podcast, is simply because there's just not a whole lot out there for established church leaders. And you're talking about the future of the established church. I'm very concerned that we don't have enough leaders in training to inherit some of these churches. Most established churches, and we're talking about 400,000-ish churches in the United States, the vast majority of them are established. Most of them have baby boomer or older pastors. And I don't see a whole lot of Gen X, Millennial, and Gen Z now being trained up to lead those churches. So part of what I want to do is I always want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. So hopefully with a podcast and a blog and the little bit of training that I can do just here at my own local church is to train up future established church leaders. Because I do fear that there's a time coming in about 5 or 10 years where we just won't have as many leaders to lead a lot of these churches. And we need to start now to train people up.
I hope that as a denomination, the solution is yes and, because if let's take the hypothetical 600-person established church, if it's unhealthy and that church closes its doors, we haven't gained anything if we've planted a church with 100 people. In fact, we've had a net loss of
You've lost
500 people. And I just am so concerned that we're planning lots of churches, and I'm for that, but are our established churches staying healthy?
Completely agree with you. It's a both-and strategy. I want to help with church planters. Actually, we're helping plant 2 churches from West Bradenton, one in Guadalajara, Mexico, another in Tucson, Arizona. So we're very much in the church planting camp. We have planted 3 churches in our area historically. So our church is a sending, going kind of church. It is a both-and strategy. I completely agree with you. God, for whatever reason, just gave me a burden and a heart for these churches that have just been around a while. So while I support church planters, that's a world I don't know. In a world that God has not called me to, I'll be there. I'll be walking alongside them, cheering them on. But yeah, I've been called into the churches with pews. Those are the churches I love.
Okay, what's the biggest issue facing Southern Baptists right now, and how do we tackle it?
A lack of evangelism. I think that's the number one problem in the Southern Baptist Convention is we don't have churches that are passionate about evangelism. I don't even hear that word a lot, evangelism. And it's in a sense, a biblical word. We're talking about the good news of Jesus Christ, which I know our denomination is about. I know that that's what we love. I just don't see a whole lot of churches that are healthy evangelistically.
And how do we make that happen?
I think it starts with the pastors. I think that we as pastors have to lead our churches in evangelistic efforts. And if we are not leading ourselves, if we're not out there sharing the gospel in our neighborhoods, sharing the gospel in our community, our churches won't. Every church has an address. We're 1305 43rd Street West here in Bradenton, Florida. God, in His sovereignty, has placed us at this location. We're here for a very specific reason. Now, we're completely out of parking. We have 4 services, and we got all sorts of issues with our facility that we need to renovate. But this is where God has called us. This is our building. This is our place. This is our location. It's upon us to win the community around us. And every one of my members has a home address. And we're called to reach the neighbors. We're called into our own backyards. And I fear that a lot of Southern Baptist churches have lost a sense of an evangelistic call into their communities. So it's something that we're weaker on here. It's something I need to improve upon in my own life. So I won't say, look at us, we've got it all figured out. We don't, but we're definitely going to start this year pushing outward more and pushing outward into our community and sharing the gospel. We're actually going to even go door to door and just start that again. I know all the stats. Will it work? I don't know, but we have to start somewhere.
I've talked to pastors, especially younger pastors, who say, we still do evangelism. It's just that faith or evangelism explosion or whatever your program is, that doesn't work for us. We need to build relationships and then share the gospel. And then I have pastors who I explain that to, and they say, okay, but they must not be building those relationships because too often the gospel isn't being shared. And so in the era and the culture that we live in, Is there a right or wrong way to do evangelism?
As long as you're sharing the gospel, I'm more than likely going to be okay with you. Now, sometimes your tone is important, but you brought up some programs which historically have been relatively good programs. I'm not one to say a program's going to answer, it's going to be the solution to the problem. But what has happened is there were a lot of churches that had those programs, and they were actually doing evangelism. Maybe they could have done it better, but they were actually getting out there and sharing their faith. And a lot of churches saw that, hey, for whatever reason, at that particular church, it wasn't working as well as they wanted, so they canceled it. But they never replaced it with anything else. And I think that that's what's happened at a lot of our Southern Baptist churches is there was a program. The program could have been run a little better. It could have worked a little better, certainly. And because it wasn't working as leaders wanted it to, they simply canceled the program and then left off the fact that they needed to replace it with something else. So I'm all for incarnational ministry, building relationships. I don't think programs are the answer at all. But we still have to train and equip our people. We still need something to help our people understand how to share their faith. And hey, here's a way to do it that's not so aggressive and not so in your face. Building relationships is great, and I certainly want everyone in my church doing that. The gospel ultimately has to be proclaimed. It has to be something that's spoken and said and heard. Otherwise, people aren't going to get saved. So, yes, we don't want to have a poor tone in sharing our faith. Yelling at people with signs that say hate on them on the side of the street, probably not the best way to share the gospel. So there are some poorer ways to get the word out. But by and large, we just see churches that aren't doing it at all.
Right.
And just saying, hey, we just build relationships. Well, building relationships is awesome, but that's not sharing the gospel. So I do think that we need to think through as churches better ways of equipping and training our people so that they know how to proclaim the message of Jesus Christ.
Is the greater Tampa area unique in any way, or are the challenges here basically the same when it comes to evangelism, for instance?
So broadly, just Florida.
Okay.
Just talking Florida. I love this state. I love Florida. I love everything about it. It is bizarre. It is strange. All of the weird news comes out of Florida. And I love that about our state. We've got all sorts of different types of people from all sorts of different backgrounds. And Miami is very different than Pensacola. But I love it. I love it all. So when I'm talking about the Tampa Bay region, which is what we're a part of, I just have a deep love for Florida in general. I have a specific love for this area. I grew up just north of here in the heart of St. Petersburg. So there are some unique challenges, though. So I have a deep love for this place. But one of the challenges that we're facing in Manatee County specifically is the heroin epidemic. We are the epicenter of Florida's heroin epidemic. And there is a lot of, and our church is in the neighborhood that is among the hardest hit in the entire state. So we have the highest child removal rates in the state. We have the highest overdoses per capita in the state. We have more deaths than I care to mention. So we've had a lot of, and it's affected our church. I've done a funeral of someone connected to our church because they OD'd on heroin. We have children that have lost parents here in our congregation. We've dealt with child trafficking. We've dealt with gangs. All of the above, and it's hard and it's dark. So Florida is amazing. I love Florida. The sunshine and the sand and everything about this state, it's beautiful. But you scratch that sand and you just scratch the sunshine just a little bit, and you really look, and it's a dark place here. And there's a lot of pain and there's a lot of hurt, particularly in our county surrounding the heroin epidemic. So we've started a ministry here. It's called Hope Against Heroin. We're actually active in combating this problem. We have a lot of foster families here that have taken in children that have been either abandoned or lost parents to overdoses to heroin. So we're in the weeds, and we're right at the front lines of this battle. But it is certainly one of the biggest challenges in our community is the fact that the heroin epidemic this is the epicenter of all of those problems that are going on in the state, and it's heartbreaking. But again, it gets back to the fact that the gospel message solves these problems, and we have to be gospel agents to get out the good news of Jesus.
How long have you had the heroin ministry?
It's been in talks for 3 or 4 months, but it just started in January officially. What happened was we had some families that were affected very personally by the heroin epidemic, and they decided to run with it. And my student pastor, Raul Hernandez, did an amazing job of kickstarting that ministry, launching the ministry. Not something a student pastor typically leads, but he is an incredible leader here. He's one of our pastors, and he just felt that passion to just push forward with it. And Raul's the kind of guy that you just don't tell him no. So we decided, and it was a great thing. So we decided to run with it, and we started not really knowing what we were doing, but now we talk about perceptions and branding earlier. Now what I hear a lot of is, "Oh, you're the heroin church," and I'm like, "Yes, we are. And if you need help, come our way. And by the way, we really want to tell you about Jesus too." So we're seeing a lot of good that has come out of this, but we're just getting started with it.
That's neat. Let's shift again in our conversation. Are you concerned that Calvinism is causing divisions among Southern Baptists, or are you among those hopeful that we're big enough for various theological models and the Reformed movement will help Southern Baptists grow?
I am concerned of any division in the Southern Baptist Convention. There was one author, one historian, who said of the SBC that we are a contentious lot. And historically, we have had a lot of controversies that have dated all the way back to the founding of our denomination. So we are known to have these divisions. I would be concerned about any division in our denomination. It is a topic that is certainly one that involves a lot of heated discussions. Where I stand personally is I would hope that Reformed theology would not be a test of fellowship in our own denomination. Certainly it is not in our church. We have those who are Reformed or Calvinist. We have those who are not. And we do okay with it. I won't say that everything's perfect and rosy, but we would not consider it a test of fellowship in my own congregation. I would hope that it would not be a test of fellowship in our denomination. I would hope that. So I am hopeful. I do think we can get through it. We've had these issues before, even involving Reformed theology. Most people may not realize that, but it goes back all the way to the beginning of our denomination. It has been here since 1845, and so I would hope that we could get through it. But I do have concerns. But it's not concerns for one side or the other. It's concerns that we would be divided over this. I would hope that we could build bridges and not burn them with this issue.
What does the church need to be doing right now to engage more millennials? You and I talked before the camera started rolling about, the makeup of your church and how you have, a lot of young families. How do churches reach them and engage them when all the headlines are millennials leaving the church in record numbers? Let's understand who millennials are. People say young people, and they're right, but if it's somebody who's a teenager now, they're not a millennial. Right.
They're Gen Z. So a lot of times when people say millennials, what they're saying is, how do you reach the 10-year-old, the 12-year-old, the 18-year-old? Well, most millennials now are 18 and older. So I'm the oldest of the millennials. I was born in 1980, so I just barely make that cutoff, depending on which demographer is saying what. But I barely make the cutoff. I have 3 kids. Millennials are adults now for the most part, and they're also the largest generation in the United States. We're also a very diverse generation. So when people say millennials, it's not the 12-year-old white person. We're talking about the 30-year-old Hispanic, the 28-year-old Asian person. I mean, that's the millennial group. So the way that you reach millennials is it is different than the way that you reach previous generations. My grandparents came of age when the United States was 87% white. And sometime around 2020, nationally, our preschools are going to be minority white. In the 1960s, 1 in 1,000 marriages was between two races. By the time my children are getting married, it's going to be 1 in 3 marriages that are between races. So that means the likelihood of one of my kids marrying someone who's not their race is extremely high. I don't know the stats on that, but it's close to 100%. At least one of them will marry outside of their race. So the millennial generation looks very different. It's poorer. We will not make as much as our parents or our grandparents, just what the stats show. It's certainly more diverse. We have a variety of beliefs in our generation, more so than previous generations. And we're not attending church as much. So the church that reaches millennials puts millennials in leadership and trains and equips them. You're not going to reach them with fanciness, with a particular style of music. I mean, it helps, I guess, but really one of the best things that a church can do is to start equipping and training millennials and putting them in places of leadership, showing them that they're important, and also taking care of their children. And children's ministry is very, very important with millennials. So you got to have clean facilities. You got to have a place for the children. And then Gen Z is a whole other topic. And since I'm millennial, I'll just say I don't get that Gen Z. They're the younger people. I don't understand them. But yeah, I think it is harder than it used to be with reaching the next generation. You once had 2 generations in the church because the life expectancy in 1900 was about 45 years old.
Right.
So you had only 2 generations in your church in 1900. Today you have 5 generations, and you got to bridge all of those divides. And the life issues of a 15-year-old very different than the life stage issues of an 85-year-old. Right. So it's harder, most definitely. But I think one of the best ways to reach them is train and equip them, put them in places of leadership, and have a sense of mission. Understand who you are as a church and who you need to reach. And that will ultimately draw in millennials. And then the ones that aren't saved, you got to get out there and share the gospel with them. You got to get out there and build a relationship so that you can share Jesus with them. And again, I think it just gets back to a lack of evangelism among the millennial generation.
You brought up an interesting point with the leadership for millennials and letting them have that opportunity. I talked with a pastor recently who said, in entrepreneurship, in athletics, 20-somethings are the faces of organizations, and they have their own companies and things like that. But the 20-somethings in the average church aren't even allowed to lead in silent prayer.
Some churches actually have an age cutoff for certain positions. Like, you can't serve unless you're 25 years old. That's ridiculous. If someone is equipped and trained and ready to go, whatever age, whether they're 20 or 80, it shouldn't matter. So yeah, there are some churches that have built-in barriers to younger people serving in leadership, and you've got to tear those barriers down. You've got to tear those walls down.
I just have one last question for you here, and it's the most personal. You have 2 brothers, Art and Jess, right? And Art is, he's vice president at Southeastern Theological Seminary. And then Jess is a church planter.
Correct.
And then your father, Tom, is president and CEO of Lifeway, that little bitty organization.
He's an all right guy. I like him okay.
And so tell me, what is it like when the extended Rayner family gets together and all those minds start debating ideas?
It's the most uber spiritual gathering that you can. No, we're like any other family. We get together. There are lots of small children around because we all have children, and it's just like any other family gathering. I've got a loving family. I am blessed to have just great parents. My dad's just like any other dad, and my brothers, we love it. So we try during the holidays to get together and hang out. There are ideas that often get debated, and we're all entrepreneurs in a sense, so we're always thinking and dreaming, and that part's fun as well. But I love my family. I'm blessed to be able to have them, and I do realize that that my dad is in a prominent position in the Southern Baptist Convention. The way I put it is it's 99% blessing, 1% curse. So the blessings far outweigh any of the issues that may come up because of it. I love my family, and really the one that holds it all together is my mom, though. So I don't want to forget about her. She has been so much of an inspiration and an encouragement for all of us. I think she's one of the key reasons why we were called into ministry, is because she encouraged all of us along the way. So I gotta give a lot of credit to my mom too.
Of course. Thank you so much for meeting with me today.
Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate it.